The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning. The air felt heavy, like something big was about to happen. People whispered in the back rows, glancing toward the woman standing alone near the defense table. She looked calm on the outside, but her eyes carried the weight of something deeper, something she couldn't yet show. Her name was Alicia Grant, a community worker who had spent years helping families find justice when they couldn't afford it. She wasn't used to being the one standing in front of a judge. She wasn't a criminal, not by any stretch, but today she was treated like one. Judge Harold Benton walked in with his usual air of confidence. Everyone stood as he entered, and he gave a half smile, glancing at the police officers sitting to his right. He knew them well. They had worked with him for years. They nodded in greeting, a silent exchange that said more than words ever could. "Let's get this over with," the judge said, settling into his chair. The case was supposed to be simple. At least that's what it looked like on paper. Alicia had been charged with obstructing police duties during an arrest. The truth, however, was far from what the official report said. She hadn't interfered with anything. She had been filming a scene where two officers were using unnecessary force during a routine traffic stop. She stood on the sidewalk, phone in hand, capturing what she believed was evidence of wrongdoing. The next day, she was arrested. Alicia's lawyer, a young public defender named Tom Rivera, looked nervous as he shuffled his papers. He knew how this courtroom worked. He knew the judge didn't like cases that involved officers being questioned. He also knew that going against the local police in this city could ruin a career. "Your Honor," Tom began softly, "we have video evidence that clearly shows my client." Judge Benton cut him off almost immediately. "Counselor, I've reviewed the report. Your client was warned multiple times to stop interfering with a lawful arrest. She didn't comply. I don't need a video to tell me what's already clear." Alicia raised her head slightly, trying to keep her composure. "Your Honor, I didn't interfere," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "I was just recording from a safe distance. I didn't say a word to the officers. I was just—" "Miss Grant," the judge interrupted, tapping his pen on the desk. "The officers on duty said you distracted them. That's enough for obstruction." She wanted to say more, to tell him that she had done nothing wrong, that the officers were lying, that she had proof. But the look on the judge's face told her it didn't matter. The decision was already made before she ever walked in. In the back of the courtroom, one of the officers, a broad-shouldered man named Officer Blake, leaned back in his seat with a smirk. He whispered something to his partner, and they both chuckled quietly. Alicia noticed, but she didn't react. She had learned that staying calm was sometimes the most powerful statement you could make. Tom tried again, his voice a little stronger this time. "Your Honor, may I at least submit the footage into the record for review?" "It's vital to—" "Denied," the judge said flatly. "This court doesn't need amateur videos from cell phones to determine facts. We have sworn officers who witnessed the event. That's sufficient." The gavel came down lightly, but the sound echoed like thunder in the room. Alicia felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. She looked around the courtroom, at the officers, at the empty chairs, at the flag behind the judge's bench. Everything she had ever believed about fairness and justice felt like it was slipping away right in front of her. Tom leaned toward her, whispering, "I'm sorry." "He's not going to listen." Alicia nodded slowly. "It's okay," she said quietly. "Just let him finish." The rest of the hearing moved quickly. The judge allowed the prosecution to speak freely, interrupting only to agree or emphasize their points. When Tom tried to defend Alicia again, Benton waved him off with an impatient sigh. In less than 20 minutes, it was over. "The court finds the defendant guilty of obstruction of justice," Benton declared, his voice cold and official. "You'll pay a fine and perform community service. I hope this serves as a reminder that interfering with police work in any form is unacceptable." He looked at her with that same faint smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Court is adjourned." The officers stood up, trying not to look too satisfied, but their grins gave them away. As they walked past her, one of them murmured under his breath, "Should have known better than to mess with us." Alicia didn't reply. She gathered her things quietly, holding her phone tightly in her hand, the same phone that held the video they all refused to see. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was bright and loud. People were talking about their own cases, their own worries, their own lives. Alicia stood there for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She had been through many tough moments in her life, but this one hurt differently. Not because she lost a case, but because she saw how the system worked from the inside, and it was worse than she had imagined. Her lawyer joined her a few minutes later. "You can appeal," he said softly. "But I'll be honest, in this county, it's going to be tough. The same people who run the courts work closely with the police department." Alicia gave a faint smile. "I know," she said, "but thank you for trying." He looked like he wanted to say more, but there was nothing left to say. She walked away, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, each step echoing like a quiet promise. That evening, the courthouse lights were dim. Inside one of the chambers, laughter filled the air. Judge Benton sat at a polished wooden table with the same two officers from earlier. They were relaxed now, sharing drinks and stories. "You see her face?" Officer Blake said with a grin. "She really thought she was going to win." Benton laughed, raising his glass. "They always do. People like her think they can outsmart the system. But the system has rules, and when I make sure they're followed." The other officer chuckled. "To justice, then?" "To justice," Benton repeated, clinking glasses with them. They laughed again, louder this time, completely unaware that a small recording device hidden behind a stack of files was quietly capturing every word. In another part of town, Alicia sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. The video she recorded still played on the screen, the truth sitting right there, ignored by the people who were supposed to care about it. She replayed it one more time, watching as the officers pushed the man they arrested, hearing her own voice saying softly, "Please don't hurt him." She thought about the courtroom, the laughter, the smirks, the way the judge had dismissed her like she didn't matter. But underneath her calm expression, something had started to change. This wasn't over. She looked out the window, her reflection faint against the city lights. Her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. The message read, "We saw what happened. You're not alone. Let's talk." Alicia read it twice, then set the phone down. Her heart raced, but not from fear, from hope. Someone out there had seen what she saw. Someone knew. The night outside grew quieter. The courthouse was dark, its windows reflecting the streetlights. Inside, the laughter of the judge and his friends faded away, leaving behind only the echo of their arrogance, an echo that soon enough would come back to haunt them. Alicia didn't know exactly what was coming next, but deep down she knew one thing: justice wasn't finished yet. The system might have failed her today, but the truth had a way of finding its voice. And when it did, no one in that courtroom would be ready for it. The sun was setting behind the courthouse, painting the windows orange and gold. Inside, the echo of laughter carried down the hallway. Judge Harold Benton leaned back in his chair, pleased with himself. The case had gone exactly how he wanted. The officers were satisfied, and the woman, what was her name again? Alicia something, had been put in her place. He loosened his tie and looked around his office, proud of the framed certificates on the walls, the awards from police departments, and the photo of him shaking hands with the mayor. Everything about the room told a story, one of power, connections, and a man who thought he knew exactly how to play the system. Two police officers were sitting across from him, still in uniform but relaxed now, their jackets unbuttoned. They were old friends of the judge. One of them, Officer Blake, had been with the department for over a decade. He was loud, confident, and loved attention. The other, Officer Reed, was quieter but followed Blake's lead in almost everything. Blake raised his glass. "To another win," he said with a grin. "You never disappoint, Judge." Benton smiled and poured himself another drink. "It's not about winning," he said, pretending to sound serious. "It's about keeping order. People think they can challenge authority and get away with it." "Not in my courtroom," Reed chuckled. "That woman really thought she could record us and embarrass the department. She didn't know who she was dealing with." "She'll remember now," Blake added, laughing. "Next time she'll think twice before pulling out her phone." The judge didn't say it out loud, but he agreed. He had always believed people needed to be reminded of their place, especially those who questioned the police or the court. In his mind, he was maintaining balance, keeping control. They talked for a while, joking about old cases and swapping stories about defendants who had tried to outsmart the system. To them, it was just another day at work, another moment where they felt untouchable. But what they didn't know was that the walls had ears that night. A small recording device sat quietly on a shelf behind a stack of law books. It wasn't large or fancy, but it was powerful enough to capture every word. The red light was so tiny no one noticed it. Not the judge, not the officers. It had been placed there earlier that morning by someone who knew exactly how to stay unnoticed. As the laughter continued, the device kept recording. Meanwhile, across town, Alicia sat in a small cafe, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She was still replaying the court scene in her mind. The look on the judge's face, the smirks from the officers, it all stayed with her. Her phone buzzed again. The same unknown number that messaged her earlier had sent another text. "You did the right thing. Don't lose hope. We've been watching this courthouse for months." She stared at the message for a moment, unsure if it was real or some kind of prank. She typed back slowly. "Who is this?" The reply came quickly. "Someone who wants to make things right. Can we meet tomorrow morning? 9 a.m. at the park across from City Hall." Alicia hesitated. She had been warned before about trusting strangers, especially after what had just happened. But something about the message felt different. Calm, direct, and strangely reassuring. She decided to go. The next morning, the city park was quiet except for the sound of birds and the distant hum of traffic. Alicia arrived early and sat on a bench near the fountain. For a few minutes, she thought maybe no one would show up. Then a woman approached her. She looked to be in her 40s, dressed simply in a gray jacket and jeans, carrying a small folder. She smiled politely and sat beside Alicia. "You must be Alicia," she said softly. "Yes, and you are?" "My name isn't important right now," the woman said, glancing around. "Let's just say I work with a group that investigates corruption in local courts." Alicia frowned slightly. "You're saying you know about Judge Benton?" The woman nodded. "We've known for a while. He's been protecting certain officers, ignoring evidence, and dismissing cases that should have been investigated. The problem is, no one's been able to catch him in the act. Until now." Alicia leaned forward. "What do you mean?" The woman smiled faintly. "You did something brave. You stood up and recorded what they were doing. That got our attention. And yesterday we got something else. A recording from his office after your hearing. Let's just say it's very useful." Alicia's eyes widened. "You mean you recorded him?" "We did," the woman said quietly. "And he gave us more than we could have hoped for. He admitted things, laughed about cases he influenced, even mentioned the police department by name." Alicia sat back, stunned. Part of her felt relieved, but another part was cautious. "If you have that recording, what happens next?" The woman opened her folder and showed Alicia a photo of a small recording device. "We're building a case, but we need to handle it carefully. These people are powerful and well-connected. One wrong move and the evidence could disappear." Alicia nodded slowly. "So what do you want from me?" The woman looked at her kindly. "We want your help. You're already on the record as someone who experienced this firsthand. You've got credibility. If we move forward, we'll need your testimony." Alicia hesitated. She had already faced humiliation once. She had been disrespected, silenced, and judged unfairly. But deep down she knew this was her chance to do something meaningful, not just for herself but for everyone who had been through the same thing. She looked up and said, "I'll do it." The woman smiled. "Good, we'll be in touch soon. And Alicia, keep this quiet. Don't mention it to anyone, especially not anyone connected to the courthouse." As the woman stood up to leave, Alicia felt a strange mix of fear and strength. For the first time in days, she felt like the truth might actually come out. Back at the courthouse, the mood was very different. Judge Benton was in his office again, flipping through papers when Officer Blake knocked on the door. "Hey, Judge," Blake said cheerfully. "I was thinking we should all get together this weekend. Maybe barbecue or something." "You've earned it," Benton chuckled. "You just can't sit still, can you?" Blake shrugged. "Gotta celebrate the wins." "Sure," Benton said, smiling. "But make sure you keep things quiet. The fewer people talking about court cases outside this building, the better." "Of course," Blake said. "We know the drill." As he left, the judge leaned back in his chair, completely unaware that the walls around him held a secret, one that could destroy everything he'd built. Days passed, and rumors started to spread quietly through the courthouse. Someone had reported the judge to the state judicial board. No one knew who it was, but people started acting differently. Conversations stopped when he entered the room. Officers who used to joke around now avoided eye contact. Benton noticed, but he brushed it off. He'd been through complaints before. Nothing ever stuck. He had friends in the right places, but this time was different. Alicia, meanwhile, kept to herself. She went to work, smiled when she needed to, and waited for updates from the woman at the park. Every day that passed felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. Then one evening her phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. It's time. Be ready for next week. You'll be called to the courthouse again, but not as a defendant. Alicia stared at the message for a long moment. Her heart started to race, not out of fear, but out of something stronger, anticipation. Across town, Judge Benton sat at his desk going through paperwork when his phone rang. It was a call from the state judicial office. His expression changed instantly. "Yes, this is Judge Benton," he said cautiously. A voice on the other end replied firmly, "Judge, we'll need you present at a special hearing next week. It concerns a complaint regarding your recent conduct in court." He froze. "A complaint?" "Yes, sir," the voice said. "You'll receive official notice tomorrow. Please prepare to respond." When the call ended, Benton sat in silence. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar, unease. Outside, the night was calm, but inside the courthouse, the foundations of power were starting to crack. Alicia didn't know all the details yet, but she could sense it. The tide was turning. The same building that once humiliated her was about to see the truth unfold, piece by piece. And this time, she wouldn't be standing there alone. The courthouse looked different that morning. The same gray building that once felt cold and unfair now seemed alive with whispers and tension. Something big was about to happen, and everyone could sense it. Judge Harold Benton walked through the front doors like he always did, head high, briefcase in hand, nodding at the staff who greeted him politely. He tried to act normal, but inside his thoughts were running wild. It had been a week since he received the notice about the special hearing. The letter didn't explain much, only that he needed to appear before an internal review committee regarding a complaint. He told himself it was nothing serious, probably just another angry defendant or a paperwork issue. Still, there was a small knot in his stomach he couldn't shake. He sat down at his bench as the courtroom filled with people. The air was heavy with curiosity. Clerks moved quickly between tables, reporters waited in the back row, and even some officers looked unsure about what was happening. Then the door opened, and a woman walked in. Benton's breath caught for a moment. It was her, Alicia Grant, the same woman he'd sentenced just a week ago, the same woman he'd dismissed like she didn't matter. She walked calmly to the front, dressed in a simple black suit. There was no fear in her face this time, only quiet confidence. She didn't look like someone there to defend herself. She looked like someone who was in control. The judge frowned slightly and leaned forward. "Miss Grant, what are you doing here?" Before she could answer, another man stood up from the side of the room. "Your Honor, this hearing is being conducted by the State Judicial Review Committee. I am Special Investigator John Miller. Miss Grant is here today on official business." Benton blinked. "Official business? What do you mean?" The investigator opened a folder. "Miss Grant is not appearing as a defendant or a witness in your previous case. She is here as part of an ongoing federal investigation into judicial misconduct in this district." A quiet gasp moved through the room. Even the officers sitting nearby looked confused. Benton straightened in his seat. "This is absurd," he said, forcing a laugh. "Judicial misconduct? In my court? That's ridiculous." The investigator didn't flinch. "We'll see about that." He turned to Alicia. "Miss Grant, you may proceed." Alicia nodded, stepped forward, and placed a small device on the table. It was a portable recorder, the same kind used for interviews and investigations. She looked directly at the judge. "I believe you remember this," she said softly. "It recorded everything that was said in your chambers after my trial last week." The room went completely silent. Benton's eyes widened slightly, but he tried to stay calm. "You can't use private recordings in court," he said quickly. "That's illegal without consent." The investigator replied, "Normally, yes, but in this case the device was placed under federal authorization as part of a pre-existing investigation into your court. You just didn't know it." Benton froze. "A federal investigation?" "That's right," Alicia said, her voice calm and clear. "I wasn't just some woman with a phone that day, Judge Benton. I work with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. My appearance in your courtroom was part of an undercover operation to investigate patterns of bias and misconduct. Murmurs broke out among the people in the room. The officers who once looked smug now stared at the floor. The reporters scribbled furiously. The judge's face turned pale. You're with the DOJ? Yes, she said simply. And the way you handled my case, dismissing evidence favoring officers without question, and celebrating afterward, confirmed everything we suspected. She pressed a button on the recorder, and a familiar voice filled the courtroom. It was the judge's own voice. You see her face? Officer Blake's voice said through the speaker, followed by laughter. She really thought she was going to win. Then the judge's voice answered, clear and unmistakable. They always do. People like her think they can outsmart the system. But the system has rules, and I make sure they're followed. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter followed. No one in the room moved. The judge sat completely still, staring at the recorder as if it were something poisonous. When the recording ended, Alicia spoke again. This is just one of several recordings collected over the past few months. Each one shows a pattern of behavior: favoritism toward law enforcement, dismissal of valid evidence, and disrespect toward defendants based on race and background. The investigator handed copies of documents to the court clerk. We also have written statements, case reviews, and complaints from multiple attorneys who reported similar experiences. This is no coincidence. Judge Benton tried to speak, but his voice shook. This is an ambush. I've served this community for 30 years. I've always done my duty. Alicia looked at him, her expression calm but firm. Duty doesn't mean power, Judge. And justice isn't something you get to choose when it's convenient. For a moment, the judge said nothing. He looked out at the courtroom, at the people he'd ruled over for years, the officers he'd protected, the lawyers who had always kept quiet. But now none of them were looking back at him. The investigator stood. Judge Benton, as of this moment, you are temporarily relieved of your duties pending the outcome of this investigation. You will surrender your access to court chambers and records. You are required to cooperate fully. The words echoed through the room like a final verdict. Benton's hands trembled as he reached for his papers, trying to collect himself. You don't understand, he muttered. This will ruin everything. You're making a mistake, but no one responded. The clerk quietly began clearing the bench. The officers who once laughed now avoided his eyes, and Alicia stood silently watching him. Outside the courthouse, the crowd grew. Reporters with cameras waited eagerly for news, their voices overlapping in a blur of questions. When the doors opened and Judge Benton stepped out, the flash of cameras hit him like a storm. He didn't answer a single question. He just kept walking, his once confident stride now slow and uncertain. Alicia walked out a few minutes later. The sunlight hit her face, warm and bright. Reporters turned toward her instantly. Miss Grant, are you the woman from the obstruction case? One shouted. Are you really a federal investigator? Another asked. She smiled slightly and said only, the truth has a way of showing itself when you stop running from it. Then she walked down the courthouse steps, leaving the noise behind her. That night, the city news stations were filled with the story. Local judge under federal investigation for corruption. The video clip from the courtroom played again and again, the moment when Alicia revealed her true identity. People who had once felt powerless watched it and felt a spark of hope. In a quiet apartment across town, Alicia sat by her window, looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with messages from people thanking her for what she did. But she didn't do it for praise. She did it because she had seen too many people lose faith in the system. Too many lives changed by injustice that went unseen. She thought about the first day she walked into that courtroom, scared, uncertain, treated like she didn't belong. Now that same courtroom was the place where the truth finally began to surface. The next morning, she received a call from the same woman who had first met her in the park. You did well, the woman said softly. It's not over yet, but the hard part is done. The rest will come in time. Alicia nodded even though the woman couldn't see her. I just hope this means something, she said. That it helps others. It already does, the woman replied. Sometimes all it takes is one person to stand up for everyone else to find their voice. When the call ended, Alicia looked out the window again. The city was waking up, people heading to work, buses moving down the street, children laughing in the distance. Life went on, but something in the air felt lighter. Inside the courthouse, the judge's nameplate had already been removed from his office door. His desk sat empty, the once neat shelves now bare. The room that had been filled with laughter and arrogance was silent, and for the first time in a long while, that silence felt like justice beginning to breathe again. The days after Alicia's revelation moved slowly, but with a quiet intensity. The courthouse was no longer the same place. Every clerk, every lawyer, every officer who had once walked the halls with ease now carried an invisible weight. Conversation stopped when Judge Benton appeared, and people whispered about what had happened, about the recordings, the investigation, and the woman who had exposed it all. Alicia didn't go back to that courthouse right away. She spent her time preparing, reviewing the evidence, and meeting with federal investigators who had taken over the case. She pored over every detail, recordings, documents, notes, and emails. Each one showed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. This wasn't a single mistake. This was a system built on favoritism, bias, and misuse of authority. The investigator from the park, the one who first reached out to her, was in contact constantly. "We need you ready," the woman said on one call. "Your testimony will make the difference. The rest of this network has to be dismantled, but we can't do it without you." Alicia nodded silently. She had thought about all the people who had been affected by the judge's rulings, defendants who had been treated unfairly, families who had lost hope, community members who had been silenced. She had walked through the courthouse before, afraid and powerless, but now she felt stronger. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was part of a team that could change things. When the investigators officially began their work, the courthouse was quiet but tense. Officers who had laughed at her just days ago were now careful, polite even. Judge Benton tried to maintain his usual air of control, but his calm mask slipped whenever federal investigators asked questions or requested files. Alicia returned to the courthouse for the first official session of the federal investigation. The atmosphere was completely different from before. Gone was the arrogance and smugness she had faced in her original hearing. Instead, there was a careful order. People were here to find the truth, and they were taking every detail seriously. She was called to the stand. Her steps felt firm, but her heart beat rapidly. She knew every word mattered. Every pause could influence the outcome. She had watched too many cases in her career where small details were ignored, and she wasn't about to let that happen now. "Please state your full name and position for the record," the lead investigator said. "Alicia Grant," she replied clearly. "I am a social worker and a federal investigator with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division." A ripple went through the room. Even the officers in the back looked surprised. The same woman they had dismissed as a troublemaker was now the person leading the inquiry. "Miss Grant," the investigator continued, "can you describe what happened during your previous case in this courtroom?" Alicia took a deep breath. "Yes. I was accused of obstructing police during an arrest I had actually recorded to ensure there was a record of proper conduct. The judge dismissed my evidence without review, sided with the officers, and celebrated the outcome with them after the hearing. Those actions were part of a pattern we have been documenting." She placed the small recorder on the table and pressed play. The judge's laughter filled the room again, this time uncomfortably loud in the silence of the investigation. Every word, every moment of arrogance was captured for official review. The room remained quiet. Benton's face turned red, but he said nothing. He had no response for this. The weight of his own words used against him made him powerless in a way he had never experienced. Over the following days, Alicia provided more evidence. Emails that showed coordination between the judge and officers. Reports that had been altered to favor law enforcement. Witness statements from people who had previously been too afraid to speak. Every piece added to the growing case. During one session, an officer who had once laughed alongside Benton finally spoke. I knew some of it was wrong," he admitted, his voice shaky. "But we thought it was just the way things were done." Alicia looked at him, not with anger, but with understanding. "You still have a choice," she said quietly. "The truth can make things right. It's never too late to help." The investigation began to gain public attention. Local news outlets ran stories about the inquiry into the judge and the officers. People in the community were surprised and hopeful. Many who had felt powerless now believed that someone could hold the system accountable. Judge Benton tried to resist. He sent letters, made phone calls, and even attempted to influence colleagues to defend him. But every action he took was documented and added to the mounting evidence against him. The federal team was thorough, leaving nothing unexamined. Meanwhile, Alicia continued her work, balancing her regular duties with her role in the investigation. She spent long nights reviewing case files, talking with witnesses, and preparing for testimony. Despite the pressure, she remained focused. Every detail mattered, and she was determined to see justice done. As the investigation unfolded, the judge's network began to crumble. Officers who had once been close to him distanced themselves. Lawyers who had previously stayed silent now came forward with testimony. Each revelation strengthened the case, and the weight of evidence made it impossible for the judge to hide. One afternoon, Benton was called into a meeting with the federal investigators. He walked in stiff and uneasy. The room was filled with documents, recordings, and witnesses. For the first time, he was not the one in control. The lead investigator spoke firmly. "Judge Benton, we have overwhelming evidence of misconduct, favoritism, and abuse of power. You are required to answer questions truthfully. Any attempt to mislead this investigation will be treated as obstruction." Benton swallowed hard. I don't understand how this is happening. I have served this community for decades. I followed the rules as I knew them. Following the rules does not excuse misconduct, the investigator said. Your actions have affected many lives. You now have an opportunity to cooperate fully. Benton nodded slowly, but his confidence was gone. He realized that no amount of influence or connections could undo what was happening. Back at the courthouse, Alicia continued to provide testimony, documents, and recordings. Each day brought new developments. Officers who had celebrated their previous victories were now being questioned about their involvement. Lawyers who had ignored misconduct were asked for explanations. The walls of the courthouse seemed to shake under the weight of truth. Through it all, Alicia remained calm and composed. She had faced fear before, but now her confidence came from knowing she was doing the right thing. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking justice for everyone who had been silenced or ignored. One morning, after weeks of testimony and evidence review, the investigator called Alicia into a private room. "You've done exceptionally well," he said. "The judge's actions are now fully documented. We are ready to move forward with formal charges." Alicia exhaled, a mixture of relief and anticipation filling her chest. "So this is it?" she asked. "Yes," the investigator said. "This is where the system finally responds. Your courage has made all the difference." The following week, news spread quickly. Judge Benton was formally removed from the bench pending sentencing. Officers implicated in the investigation were suspended, and hearings began to address their actions. The community reacted with shock, relief, and hope. People who had previously felt ignored now felt that change was possible. Alicia watched the coverage quietly from her office. She thought about the first day she entered that courthouse, unsure, alone, and dismissed. Now she saw the impact of standing up, of refusing to be silenced. She knew this was only the beginning, but it was a powerful start. Even in the quiet moments, she felt the weight of what had been done and the responsibility of what still needed to happen. The investigation had shaken the system, but it had also shown that one person's courage could influence many. The courthouse, once filled with arrogance and laughter, now stood as a symbol of accountability. The halls were quieter, but there was a sense of fairness returning, even if slowly. Alicia knew that justice wasn't about punishment alone. It was about truth, transparency, and giving people a voice. And for the first time in a long while, she felt that those values were being honored. As the sun set that evening, she walked out of the courthouse steps, looking at the city lights. The streets were alive with ordinary people, going about their lives unaware of the small but significant changes happening inside the halls of power. But those changes mattered. They mattered for everyone who had once felt powerless. She thought about the future, about the reforms and accountability measures that would follow. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't happen overnight, but it would happen. And as she walked through the streets, her heart felt lighter. She had been part of something important, something that reminded the world that truth and justice could prevail when someone refused to back down. The courthouse was unusually quiet that morning. It was the day everyone had been waiting for. The day the investigation into Judge Benton and the officers would reach its formal conclusion. The atmosphere was tense, but it was no longer heavy with fear or arrogance. Instead, there was a sense of anticipation, of justice finally arriving. Alicia arrived early, walking up the courthouse steps with a calm confidence. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She knew what she was about to witness would change lives. Not just the lives of those involved in the case, but the lives of everyone who had ever felt powerless in the system. Inside the courtroom, people were already seated. The press filled the back rows, cameras set up to capture the proceedings. The officers implicated in the investigation sat quietly, their expressions guarded. Judge Benton entered last, his usual confident stride replaced by a careful, uncertain walk. He looked around the room as if expecting support but found none. Everyone was watching and the eyes were not kind. The lead investigator, John Miller, called the hearing to order. This session is to review the findings of the federal investigation into misconduct in this court. All relevant evidence, testimony, and documentation have been collected and verified. The accused parties will now be addressed. Alicia was called to the stand first. She walked forward calmly, placing the recorder and a stack of documents on the table. She felt the weight of the room, but instead of fear, she felt purpose. "Please state your name and role for the record," the investigator said. "Alicia Grant," she replied clearly. "I am a federal investigator with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and I am here to provide testimony and evidence regarding judicial and law enforcement misconduct in this district." The room was silent. Even the judge, who had once dismissed her with a flick of his hand, now listened carefully. "Miss Grant, please explain what led to this investigation," the investigator continued. Alicia nodded. "During my original case, I observed actions that raised serious concerns about fairness and impartiality. Evidence was dismissed without review, and officers involved in the case were treated with favoritism. After my hearing, I discovered further patterns of misconduct, which I documented and reported to the Department of Justice. This led to the current investigation." She pressed play on the recorder. The laughter and arrogance from the judge's chambers filled the courtroom again. The sound of clinking glasses, jokes about dismissing defendants, and comments about protecting certain officers echoed clearly. The room remained quiet, the impact of those words sinking in. Judge Benton shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His previous confidence was gone, replaced by tension he could not hide. Alicia continued, showing additional evidence: emails, case notes, and witness statements. Each one revealed a pattern of favoritism, abuse of power, and bias. Every document reinforced the conclusion that misconduct was not isolated, it was systemic. The officers who had once laughed alongside the judge now looked away, their hands clasped tightly in front of them. Some whispered apologies to each other. Benton tried to speak several times, but the weight of proof made his protest weak and unconvincing. After hours of testimony, the investigators concluded their presentation. The lead investigator addressed the court. "Based on the evidence, Judge Benton has been found to have engaged in repeated acts of judicial misconduct. The officers implicated in this investigation have also contributed to a pattern of favoritism and abuse of power. Recommendations will be made for removal, disbarment, and appropriate disciplinary measures." Benton remained seated, his head bowed. He knew this was the end of his career. The power he had once wielded effortlessly was now stripped away. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered to record the proceedings as the public learned about the outcome. The news spread quickly. A judge removed from the bench, officers suspended, and a federal investigation that had uncovered corruption in the heart of the local justice system. People in the community reacted with a mix of shock, relief, and hope. Alicia left the courtroom later that day. She didn't seek attention or praise. She walked down the courthouse steps, her eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. She had started this journey feeling powerless, dismissed, and ignored. Now she had helped restore balance and accountability in a place where injustice had once thrived. As she stepped outside, a crowd of community members, reporters, and supporters had gathered. People clapped, some even cheered softly. They didn't know her personally, but they knew what she had done. They knew she had stood up when so many would have stayed silent. Alicia smiled faintly, waving at the crowd. She didn't speak much. Words weren't necessary. Her actions had already spoken louder than anything she could say. Later that evening, she returned home and sat by her window, looking at the city lights. The world outside continued as always. Cars moving down streets, people walking to appointments, children playing. Life went on, but something had shifted. The courthouse, once a symbol of fear and unfairness, had become a place where accountability and justice had begun to return. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues. Many thanked her for her courage. Others expressed hope that the system could truly change. Alicia read them all silently, feeling a sense of peace. She had not acted for recognition, but she understood the importance of inspiring others to believe that standing up for truth could make a difference. The next day, Alicia received a call from the federal investigator who had guided her through the process. "Everything is in motion now," he said. "The judge and the officers will face formal proceedings, and the reforms we discussed are being implemented. Your role has been crucial." Alicia nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "It feels right," she said softly, "like something that was broken is finally starting to heal." "It is," he replied, "and your courage has set an example for everyone who feels powerless in the face of corruption." Over the following weeks, the community began to notice changes in the courthouse. New leadership was appointed, and transparency measures were put in place. People who had once feared speaking out now felt safe sharing concerns. The system was far from perfect, but it was better. It was a start. Alicia continued her work with the Department of Justice, but she also spent more time in her local community. She held workshops, spoke at meetings, and encouraged people to know their rights. She wanted to ensure that the courage she had shown inspired others to act when necessary. One afternoon, she returned to the courthouse not as a defendant, not as a witness, but as someone respected and acknowledged for her role in restoring justice. She walked through the familiar halls, now quiet and orderly, feeling a sense of closure. The rooms that had once carried laughter and arrogance now felt different. They carried accountability and the promise of fairness. Inside the courtroom, a small group of people gathered for a ceremony, recognizing the efforts to reform the system. Alicia sat quietly observing the changes. New judges, new officers, and new clerks were present. They listened intently, aware of the responsibilities that came with their roles. The lead investigator addressed the room. "This process has been a reminder that justice requires courage. It requires people willing to stand up, to speak out, and to ensure that power is not misused. Today, we honor those efforts and commit to maintaining transparency and fairness in every aspect of the system." Alicia felt a quiet satisfaction. This was not about her alone. It was about the countless people whose voices had been silenced, whose cases had been ignored, and whose faith in justice had been shaken. Today, the system had begun to correct itself. After the ceremony, Alicia stepped outside once more. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the city. People passed by, some noticing her, some unaware of who she was, but all part of a community that had been reminded of the power of truth and courage. She walked slowly, thinking about the journey that had brought her here, from the courtroom where she had been dismissed and ridiculed, to the moment she revealed her true identity, to the long weeks of investigation. Every step had mattered. Every choice had led to accountability and reform. Her phone buzzed one last time that evening. A message appeared from a colleague at the Department of Justice. "Thank you for your courage. You have made a real difference. The system will never be the same." Alicia smiled. She typed a simple reply. "We just did what needed to be done." She looked out over the city one last time that night. The streets were quiet, the lights gentle against the darkness. The courthouse, once a place of fear, had become a symbol of hope. Justice had been restored, not perfectly, not instantly, but meaningfully. And in that moment, Alicia understood something important. It wasn't about glory, recognition, or applause. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. It was about giving people hope. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The fight for justice would continue, and there would always be challenges. But the system, for the first time in years, had begun to serve the people it was meant to protect. And Alicia knew she had been a part of something bigger than herself.